We're going to talk about the forest fires in California. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but it seems as if though every year there's a forest fire in California that are extremely devastating. Now, what I've always wondered is why are they so devastating on this? They're forest all over the place, even across the pond and other countries. But for some reason, the forest fires in California just burn down the entire place. So we're going to discuss that tonight, amongst other hot topics. And our guest tonight, who's going to be joining with us to help put all this into perspective, is retired fire captain John Cox from California. So without further ado, I will bring on my co-host at Small Town, Andrew. Andrew, how's it going?
It's going well, Rob.
My other co-host, Bebe Diamond. How's it going, Bebe?
It's going well. Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Heather Robinson. Heather, how are you?
Well, I'm hanging in there, Rob.
Good, good. And our guest, retired fire captain John Cox. John, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
So let's just get right into it. One of the questions that I've always had that just keeps eating at me is, why can't California control the forest fires? Or can they be controlled? What's happening in California with these forest fires, John?
Well, I think historically, the first thing you have to understand is we have some of the most explosive, combustible vegetation anywhere in the country or in the world, actually. And that is our coastal sage and the natural habitat along the coast. The BTUs that it puts out is incredible. You got flame lengths, 8-foot flame lengths that are putting out 200 to 500 BTUs per second. And you get up into the other flame lengths of 10-foot flame lengths. And now you're talking 1,000 to 2,000 BTUs per second. And so depending on the flame length of the fire, it determines how you're going to fight the fire. If they're low flame lengths, at 100 to 200 BTUs per second, then you can go direct attack. You can be in front of the fire with hand crews, engine companies, hose lines and stuff. But as they progress and get bigger, then you have to work on the outside edges and hit the head of the fire with aircraft or a retardant until you can get to a point where you can come back in and mop it up with your hand crews. The fires burn all year long. Some are more serious than others due to mostly wind and topography and weather. We're pretty famous out here for our Santa Ana winds. They normally, when I came on in the early 70s, we'd get historic Santa Ana winds in the fall, Thanksgiving, up to Christmas Eve. I remember one year I came back from a Christmas Eve party. We had just gotten home and I got called to go back to work. Thanksgiving was not unusual to be on a strike team somewhere up and down the state. So from September, October, November, those were our years, or times that we had the Santa Ana winds. The winds seem to be running more and more every year. They're somewhat cyclic, but I think we're getting more Santa Anas than we have in the past. And when you get a wind-driven fire with the right topography, they move really quickly.
I'm sorry, John, what causes the fires?
Well, in a lot of cases, most fires are accidental. There are fires that are arson fires. You either get wires down, you've got sunlight, you've got car accidents that start a little brush fire off the side of the road. You got people out in the forest or in the hills. They're hunting. A bullet might hit a spark off of a rock. There's a lot of various things that cause the fire. I was up in Anaheim Hills one time, and I was doing a report on our vegetation for the upcoming year when I got a call on the radio and said there was a fire not too far from where I was. So when I responded, there was a bulldozer from one of the other agencies, one of the forest agencies, cutting in a fire road. And their blade sparked a rock and started a fire. They weren't too happy that had to get put in the newspaper, but those are the type of accidents that occur that start these fires.
Mm-hmm. John, we got a lot of people that commented when we said we were bringing you on that says a lot of this coastal sage is not being picked up in the forest. Why do you think that is?
Well, most of it, I think now is lack of resources, a lack of will, a different opinion on whether we should or shouldn't prescribe burn. Back in the 70s and 80s, we used to, LA County, LA City, Ventura, Orange County, we used to do a lot of prescription burns. And we did two things with those burns. We reduced the fuel. We put in a black corridor, which was the blackened area where the fires routinely and historically ran from the hills down into Malibu. And we also used it for training for new firefighters to get them used to fighting wildland fires. The program ran for about 8-9 years. It was very successful. It did what it was supposed to do. And then little by little, the environmentalists shut it down. And the environmentalists and neighbors, they didn't like the little bit of smoke that came up for a couple days. But, in contrast to, we might have burnt 10,000 acres over 1 year's period. And then in contrast to losing 1 million acres, I think the little bit of smoke that we had to deal with one or 2 days was worth as complete compared to the devastation that these big fires handle. And now we don't have that anymore. So this vegetation is the dead fuel just lies on the forest floor or out in the hills. And when the fires come through, they have all that fuel to burn. There's 3 ways to put out the fire: remove the oxygen, remove the fire by a hose line or put it wet or throw dirt on it, or remove the fuel. And we can't get rid of the oxygen, but we can reduce the fuel. And that isn't being done enough. Back in 1923, the theory was to put out fires. Only a good fire was a dead fire. That was the motto of the U.S. Forest Service. In 1988, when the Yosemite fires happened, people started realizing that letting these fires burn, there was an advantage. For the first 30 days to 60 days of the Yosemite fires, the media and everybody, all the talking heads, were just going nuts about the devastation and how the forest was going to be ruined forever and ever and ever. And it turned out that within 5 years, all the vegetation came back, the native plants came back, the invasive plants were gone, and the benefit, they realized that there was a benefit to what the natives, the indigenous people, the Indians, and the people years and years ago used to do, and that was burn and have fire to clean out the forest. It's still the right thing to do, but politically, it hasn't gotten hold, and it's a difficult road to go down. There's a lot of people still fighting it. The new, since 2003, there's been a new complete cottage industry created by these fires, and that's all the people in all the schools taking different degrees in forest management and stuff, and they write these papers about what should be done, but nothing's getting done. And I'm going to read you something. I'm sure you guys have heard through the news and everything where during the news conferences, you'll hear the incident commander or some of the politicians talk about the new normal. Have you heard that term in relationship to the California fires?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we have.
Okay, let me read you something here. Nobody knew how the fire started. It took hold in the dry chaparral and grasslands and quickly spread up the side of the canyon. Propelled by winds gusting over 40 miles per hour, extreme dry air, humidity at 25%, the fire spread over the ridge and into the town below. Overwhelmed, firefighters could not contain the blaze as it swept through the streets, immobilizing homes and by the hundreds. Even brick homes with slate roofs were not spared. Before it was finally brought under control, 640 structures, including 584 homes, had been reduced to ashes. Over 4,000 people were left homeless. Does that kind of sound like the new norm?
Absolutely.
Well, guess when
Captain Cox.
when that fire was?
Hmm.
1923.
Wow. Wow.
Wow. Fast forward to 2020, 2021.
Well, that's why I said a lot of these young kids that are running these incidents today, and it's nothing, not them, it's just the fact, they haven't been there as long as we've been there, and so they get a new fire and they've never seen anything like it. So when they're on a new conference, they go, "Oh my God, we've never seen anything like this before." Well, we have. You guys just haven't been around long enough. Well,
Captain Cox, are you consulted by any of the universities or are the forest management courses out there in California? Are they
No.
asking for your expertise?
no. No, there are people that they consult. I'm not one of them. I don't know that they'd want to hear what I had to say.
Mm.
What you just read taking place in like the 1920s. Fast forward to today, and like you said, you have these kids. I mean, I might say kids, but they are kids who come out and say, "Oh, we've never seen anything like this before." I mean, you hear that all the time, even with bad weather. Oh, we've never had bad weather like this before. When if you look back in history, you will see that we have seen weather like this before. We have seen like this before. So what are we going to do?
Well,
And
we
if they're
see
not
whether
consulting, go ahead. If they're not consulting people like yourself who are experienced, and you have kids who are just like, "Oh my God, it's going to burn down the whole world." Of course, nothing's going to get done. You're about to say, Captain?
Well, you're right. We have had historic weather and fires forever like this. Every 3 to 5 years, we have the Malibu fires, and they run through the same canyons and corridors year after year after year. Usually what stops them is we run out of things to burn, and finally they hits the Pacific Ocean. So very seldom does the firefighting crews do anything but try to divert them, keep them away from structures, and either the wind slows down and we get ahead of the fire, or the Pacific Ocean stops it, one or the other. on these other fires, you take the Bel Air fire in 1961. That was 60 years ago. The exact same, and you guys have seen the video. It's a historic video. And when you look at that, it isn't any different than then than it is today. Fire still goes up uphill 16 times faster than on flat ground. The BTUs put out by 1 acre of coastal sage is exactly the same, but it was a wind-driven fire, no lack of communications, lack of resources, and this is year after year after year. Things just aren't improving. 1988, Yosemite, that was 33 years ago. The fires of 2003 that led into 2007, 2000, and so on, that was 18 years ago. And all these blue ribbon committees that are formed and all the recommendations that they make, they never follow through. Government's not really good at solving problems. That takes them way too long, too many meetings. Pretty soon you start having meetings just to set the agenda for the next meeting. When the Blue Ribbon Committee came out with their recommendations in 2003 after the Cedar fire, 15 years later, very few of those recommendations have been implemented. There was a one of the recommendations was for the state to buy 150 new fire engines and put them in service and then disperse them into strategic locations throughout the state. Of those 150 engines, only 19, no, I'm sorry, about 44 of those have been bought in 18 years.
Wow.
So, that's kind of the problem. We don't have the resources, and even if we had the people, we don't have the fire engines to put them on to take them up and down the road for a place for them to sit to drive from fire to fire, because we don't have the equipment. It's not that expensive. It's just somebody needs to budget for it, and they don't want to budget for it.
Mm-hmm.
Captain Cox, I was reading in your powerful piece here, a quick study of California wildland fire problems. One of the things you cite is that 2/3 of California fire service manpower is off duty at any given time, and they should take advantage of weather forecasting like an earthquake or the Santa Ana winds and red flag weather patterns. Can you just speak on that, please? Because you said some of this they can be predicted 5 to 10 days in advance. Thank you.
Yeah, and in fact, in 2003, that was one of the key points, and one of the recommendations 18 years ago was they didn't specifically talk about the 2/3 of the firefighters that are off, but when you're looking for your workforce in emergency situations, it'd be wonderful to find that workforce that's already trained, already has equipment, already is in the system, already is insured, and know what they're doing. We have that. 2/3 of all the firefighters in California are off duty on any given day. If those 2/3 of firefighters, let's say you call back 2,000 of them. If you call back 2,000 of them 10 days in advance, 6 days in advance, because we have that notification, whether we can predict weather 10 days in advance.
Mm-hmm.
So those people can be called back. They could be assigned to one of those new state engines that I'm talking about, purchasing 500 of them. 500 engines would allow 2,000 guys to sit on them and drive from fire to fire. Those engines could be disseminated up and down the state in the areas that are lacking manpower and equipment, possibly at no fault of their own, or because for some reason they don't want to pay for fire service in Northern California. But either way, that equipment would be available, and then you would move that equipment up and down the state, put them somewhere so that they're only 30 minutes away from a new fire rather than 6 hours away. When a new fire starts, and most of the resources are coming out of the local government agencies from down here in Orange County, LA County, sometimes it takes us 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours to get up to the fire.
Wow.
Well, when the fire's eating up an acre every 30 minutes, in those 6 hours, the fire is going to be bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets so big that you can't get ahead of the curve. And that's why, and that was the recommendation in 2003. But of that recommendation, they were only talking 150 engines, and only 44 of those have been bought.
So do you feel, I'm sorry, do you feel that the firemen have been given the tools or the power needed to put out these fires when they occur?
Depends on it depends on when they get to the fire and how far the fire has progressed.
Mm-hmm.
If the fire has progressed to the point that you can't work along the fire's edge or in front of the fire because of the heat, the BTUs and everything, then you're going defensive the whole way, and you're really just going to go around protecting structures and hoping that either weather patterns are going to change, or it's going to run out of fuel, or the aircraft is going to put in enough water or retardant or something that's going to knock down the fire so you can get ahead of it.
Well, let me ask you this: are these fires preventable? To keep them from fires are going to take place. We recognize that,
right?
But is it a way to contain the damage that take place? What aren't we doing? I hear about forest management, that we need to look at that. Then you have people saying, oh, well, we don't want to kill the habitat of the, different species or whatnot. Is it preventable? Can we slow down the amount of damage that takes place with these fires?
Well, yeah, what you have to do is stop the fire from going from a small fire into a conflagration fire.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you just can't. Sometimes either topography, wind conditions, and temperatures are going to be something that you can't deal with until one of those things break and you can get ahead of the fire. But in most cases, is if you can get on top of the fire quick enough with hand crews, equipment, some air assets right off the bat, and try to hold these fires to 1 or 2 or 10 or 15 or 20, even 100 acres, then usually you can stay ahead of it and not lose structures. The key is dumping enough equipment on the fire quick enough.
Right.
When Laguna Beach hit, the second Laguna Beach fire in I don't remember what year that was exactly. I think it was 93 maybe. We had just finished a fire in Anaheim Hills, and I was sleeping under my fire engine, and the bells went off, and we heard Laguna Beach, We all jumped up and took off for Laguna Beach. My twin brother was on one strike team. I was on the other. And when we got down there to Huntington Beach on Pacific Coast Highway, we were told by the staging officer standing in the middle of the road on PCH, just go find somewhere that's on fire and take care of it. The fire's moving too quickly. That was one of only 2 fires in my history that we were told to take independent action. But what saved Laguna Beach was my boss, Jeff Bowman, and the other local jurisdiction fire chiefs dumping all the county resources on that fire immediately, and then backfilled their departments later to handle other emergencies. If they would have had to wait for resources to come in from Northern California, LA City, LA County, that first 30 minutes to 45 minutes made all the difference in the world. Even though we lost a lot of homes, we could have lost the entire town. But jumping on that thing quickly makes a difference.
Right.
You take these fires up in Santa Barbara, north of Santa Barbara. You know, for them to, we can put 200 engines on a fire in Orange County in 30 minutes. Up there, 200 engines on a fire might take 4 or 5 hours. And by that time, it's hard to get a hold of the fire.
Captain Cox, it sounds like to me like President Trump, former President Trump, agreed with your methodology, if you will, because he was not with the those who were saying it's the climate change and the climate change activists. Would you agree with that statement that President Trump agreed, like with your methodology in terms of forest management? Because it just seemed like the forest fires in California last year were just out of control, and it's because they were not cleaning up the forest under Governor Newsom. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, I think it is. I think I wrote in my piece that I wrote, if it is or isn't climate change, we still got to put the damn fire out. Mm-hmm. So you can only have so many excuses. Personally, I believe the whole predicate of they're using climate change to set the predicate for alternative fuels and to keep people from moving out into the rural area. They want to control where people live. They also want to push wind and solar. And so they use the climate change and the California fires to do that. Now, I may stipulate that global warming or climate change has some effect on our fires today. But I don't think that's the significant problem. Whatever it is, I think that's minor. And I use the 1923 fire, the 1961 fire, all these previous fires. Conditions haven't changed. And we didn't have global warming in 1923. We didn't have global warming in 1961.
Well, that's powerful to say. I wish we've had another guest on our show, Josh Spodek, who talks about global warming, climate change, and whatnot. Wish we had invited him to hear this, because like you said, it's not to say that it doesn't have it doesn't affect the forest fires, but to the degree that the fires are at now, considering that we've had them in the 1920s, and then from that date onward, would gather to say that there's something else that's taking place here. But you do have individuals who are trying to play off of that for political reasons, like you said, to look at other ways of fuel, solar panels and whatnot, keeping people from moving out in the rural areas. And I think that if we were to depoliticize this and just really look at the root cause of the problem and ways to resolve it, we would be in a better shape. But there's big money in this. There's big money in scaring people. There's big money in doing absolutely nothing but saying, oh, we have another forest fires. When you look at across the globe, look at Australia, look at the other countries that also have forest fires. And it's not at the level that we see in California. And it just baffles me how every year or every other year or 3 years it takes place, and you still have people saying, oh, we've never seen it this bad before. But you just cited information that we had it before.
Oh yeah. Did you? I don't know if you guys had a chance to see the video panorama. I included that link, and if you haven't, take the time when you guys get a chance to look at that. That was 1981. If the kids running the fires today saw that fire today, they would say, "Oh my God, that's the new norm." Oh, I've never seen anything like it. We got fire blown out sideways. You know, but it's not any different. We've seen this for years and years and years. There is a problem with fuel mortality, the bark beetle, the dead fuel in the forest floor. There needs to be an aggressive program to go out and start thinning these things. I think they've allocated somewhere around 35,000 acres of prescribed burns last year or this year. Well, that isn't going to get it. By the time you get enough burns at that rate, we're going to have another big fire. And that's the problem. It's taking a perfect example of solving this problem, the private sector versus the public sector. And I'm not advocating that the fire department should go private. Not at all. There's very few things that I think government does well. Police and fire are two that we need to keep as government agencies. However, you also have to question and realize that any government agency, whether it's fire cops or whatever it is, they just don't run it very efficiently. A perfect example is Ford Motor Company. When they, and I'm getting to this because of the lack of historical study that the people in the fire service are doing. They don't study old fires. They don't study the things that happened 18 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the Bel Air fire, which was 60 years ago. If they did, they'd be more prepared for knowing where to put the resources at the time that resources are short. Ford studies history. When they decided to come out with a new vehicle about 3 years ago, they looked at two cars, the Pinto and the new Mustang. And it didn't take a lot of rocket science to figure out. All you had to do is look at that antique car show that's on TV, Meacham, and see that a 1965 350 Shelby Mustang was selling for $1 million, and a Pinto didn't show up. And so they made the decision, let's go with the new Mustang to look like the 65 Mustang. Let's not think about the Pinto. That is decisions made by the private sector by reviewing history. The people that are in the fire service today are not watching history. This is the Bel Air, this is the panorama fire, right? What you guys got on screen there?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I recognized it. Another example of what I'm talking about, the gypsum fire, I think the first gypsum fire in Anaheim was 1993. I was the branch director on that fire. I think about 10 years later, they had the gypsum complex fire number 2, and they lost some homes that they also lost in 93. And then about 10 years later, they had it again. That was about 5 years ago. They had the Gypsum Canyon Complex Fire 3. And it was 8:30 in the morning. My wife said, "Hey, Anaheim's got a fire going." And I saw the TV, and I'm looking at these houses that are on the left side or on the west side of the 241 freeway. And I told Melanie, I said, "They're going to lose those houses." And she goes, "Well, there's no fire near there." I said, "Not yet." I said, "In 2 hours, that fire is going to reverse, come back up that canyon, and those 3 houses there are going to burn down." She goes, "How do you know?" I said, "Because they burnt down in 93. And the freeway wasn't even there in 93, but nonetheless, the freeway really didn't have anything to do with it." But so I called dispatch, told them who I was. And I said, "Those 3 houses at the top of that tunnel up there, you guys better get some resources, because in 2 hours, those houses are going to be threatened and they're going to burn down." Well, nobody did anything. And 2 hours later at 10:30, all 3 houses were fully involved and burnt down. Fire repeats itself every time. These canyons, these hills, the Malibu fire, every one of these fires have done the same thing year after year. They run the same corridor, they run the same canyons. That needs to be understood, because if you can get your resources in the areas that are threatened quick enough, you can start saving structures.
Heather, is there anything you wanted to ask Fire Chief Cox?
Hey, Fire Chief. Well, I thank you for having me, and I'm just mostly listening. But I just, generally had curiosity about your views regarding global warming. I understand from some sources that climate is a continuous state of flux and change. And of course, we know that the scientific community tends to say one thing, but my sense of this is that it's also been very politicized. And so as with anything where politics enters, I feel like it's very hard for the layperson to even begin to know the truth. And I just wondered what you think, as someone who's out there dealing in the environment directly. Do you believe in global warming? Do you think it's overstated? Do you think it has any relevance in terms of how we fight fires and what we should do?
Well, I think global warming is overstated as a simple statement. But let me say a little bit more about it. Between the fire department, running Little League for 15 years, I was a Major League Baseball scout with the Atlanta Braves for 15 years.
Cool.
And I was an associate scout here on the West Coast. And I owned my construction company and the fire department and the restaurant we own, because we're in a canyon area that when it rains too hard or too much, we get shut down. So I've been watching weather for 51 years. I remember 1969 when I worked for Southern California Edison, that it rained for, I think, 69 straight days. We had a lot of weather that year. I remember all these years and the weather and the patterns. And I would say that for the last 51 years, nothing has changed that much. We've gotten some colder weather, some hotter weather. The average over the last 100 years has been up maybe one degree Fahrenheit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that enough to create this fire climate problem? I don't think it is. I think it could add to it, but I think there's other contributing factors that may be more important. I think the really sad thing is you can't have a discussion about it.
Mm-hmm.
even just like the pandemic we just went through, you either buy the Kool-Aid or buy the one opinion that is pushed. And if you dare to say, have a different opinion or talk about a different scientific view,
Right.
You're challenged and you're called a lot of names. And then it's funny that, science is about reviewing your theory and hypothesis,
Mm-hmm.
fixing it, adjusting it. And to do that, it takes communication, other thoughts, other opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually those opinions together become what is a consensus.
Yes.
But it seems like we don't get that consensus if you're either called a climate denier or you're called a Nazi or you're called some crazy name.
Mm-hmm.
So we never get to those things. The guys that are in the management of the fire service, especially CAL FIRE and OES. OES is the Office of Emergency Services, and CAL FIRE is the state fire department. It used to be called California Division of Forestry. It's hard. The guys in the field, the guys that are on the fire truck, the guys that are putting the fires out, they're just like the guys in Anaheim. They're all great guys. They all want to go out, get the job done, put the fire out.
Mm-hmm.
It's up at the top that it becomes difficult. Those two agencies really are nothing more than political action committees of the governor. Whatever the governor wants, they just go with the same story.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it. I've been around for all these years, a lot of these guys I worked with, and you just don't buck City Hall and you go along with the story. And it's really sad. It's a sad commentary when we look at 18 years now, since the 2003 Blue Ribbon Committee that was reviewed in 2004 and 5, again in 2007 and 8, 2015 and 2018. And virtually nothing has gotten done except meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting. I hear you, and I don't mean to be whimsical, but I have a friend, a comedian in New York City, who likes to tell a joke. She likes to say, people, the weather is a diva. You don't know whether it will be hot or cold, whether it will rain or snow. That's why it's called the weather. Anyway,
That's a good one.
the weather, it always varies. And of course, that's what makes it weather. But I'm not trying to make a scientific statement, of course, about global warming because I'm not a scientist. But I do know that weather and climate, my understanding is that patterns are vast and they span millennia and way beyond. And we've had ice ages and warm ages and fluctuations for all recorded history. And that climatologists study these things and the patterns are so vast. And I think that your point, Chief, about skepticism and science is very important. How can we have confidence in our scientists if we don't live in a world where dissent and discussion are possible? If I was saying the other night, when it comes to a totally different subject, transgenderism regarding children, when you have a climate in which psychiatrists who think differently from what's politically correct are not allowed or don't feel secure voicing their opinions, how can we feel confident that children are getting the full benefit of scientific perspective? And is any of this fair to any of us when science becomes politicized? It's our collective loss because we can't get closer to the truth that way, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. I like the way you put that. That's so true.
Yeah.
How can we,
Yes.
when people are politicizing everything and you don't want to hear another opinion, and as the the captain said, describing what science is, collectively, you're getting all this input, and then you're sitting down and you're looking at it and you're analyzing it, and you're saying, okay, this is where we were, this is what we're up against, and this is where we want to go. But when you want to silence the other side, you want to call them names simply because they don't agree with your political view of it, as opposed to scientific. I think a lot of politics has gotten into a lot of the decisions that should be made. And here we are now with the issues with California and the forest fires that we're having, as opposed to listening to those individuals who have lived it, who have seen it, who have studied the data, and say, hey, this is where we are and this is where we want to go.
Some of these policies are being driven not scientifically, but by emotion, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
And when the transgender issue with the guys or the girls or the transgender person, I don't know what the right nomenclature would be, but wants to play in the girls' sports team. Most of that is not based on science. It's based on emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's I don't understand the emotion, but there's
Seems
only,
like-
and it's really a disservice to these young girls that have worked so hard to get where they go. I mean, the pandemic was just devastating for athletes, college and high school kids, both girls and boys in all sports, losing years
Yeah.
that they had trained and worked and
Yeah.
it just wiped out. Now, some of that I understood right at the beginning. You had to be a little careful. You had to figure, but once we figured it out, it was obvious that these kids could go play sports and they weren't at risk. But unfortunately, that's been an unfortunate situation. You know, earlier I mentioned that government doesn't do things very well. That they're there to help. They
Right.
mean well in most cases, but they are reactive. They're not proactive.
Yes, it's not like business. Yes, it's not. There's not like a profit motive, so not as much drive there to tackle things efficiently.
Yeah, back in I think it was 1977, maybe a little, about 77. We had what was called the Whittier Narrows earthquake, and I told my wife, I said, I'm going to probably be going to work tomorrow. She goes, oh, you're on days off. I said, nah. I said, I think I'm going to get a call. And about an hour later, the phone rang, and I had a meeting with the fire chief, the city manager, and the mayor. And so I was asked, I said, are we prepared for the earthquake if it was to hit Anaheim, if the epicenter was right here? Mm-hmm. And I said, no, not really. Oh, really? No, not really. But we have civil defense, and we have this little old man here that says we are, and he was at the meeting. And I said, if he's talking about your cadre of equipment that's been stored in about 10 different locations, some of which was under Anaheim Stadium, I said, I'm not sure when the last time he saw it, but it's all rat infested and eaten up. I said, all the carts, the 2 field hospitals, somebody broke into, all the controlled substances and medications and drugs have been stolen. So everything you think you have, you don't have. Well, I got punished and put on special assignment that day for the next 3 months to go figure out what the problem was for Anaheim. Mm-hmm. So we did our report, and little by little, everybody lost interest. Within 6 months, nobody cared about my report until the Loma Prieta earthquake, which happened during the World Series up in Oakland. I was at home watching the World Series. The thing happened. I got up, jumped in the shower. Melanie says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to work." She goes, "Why?" I said, "Because the phone's going to ring in a couple minutes." She goes, "How do you know that?" I said, "Well, just let me know." I said, "It's either going to be the chief or Bob Young." So I'm in the shower. She brings me the portable phone. It was Bob Young. He says, "You need to come in tomorrow morning. You have a meeting with the chief and the city manager and the mayor." So we went through it again. And then after 6-7 months, nobody cared again. And then it happened again at the Northridge earthquake. Same thing. Government has a very short attention span. Everything's important for a while, and then it just goes to the back burner. And that is what's going, I think that's maybe how you explain the lack of achievement for 18 years. And most of the recommendations of 2003 have still not been met. And and they've been talked about, and none of these are all that sophisticated. They're just basic recommendations, but nothing ever gets done.
And it begs the question, why? And well, we know the answer: politics and money.
It is politics and money.
Chief Cox, to change the subject just a little bit to
I gotta thank you guys for giving me that promotion.
Yeah, we just gave him a promotion, Chief.
Captain Cox, sorry.
Okay.
Captain Cox, we know that firefighters work side by side with police officers on a daily basis.
Right.
What is your thoughts on last year, all these protests that have been calling for the fire department and police department to have their funding cut? Is that something that
Great question.
is sustainable? What did you think of all that going down last year?
Oh, it's just crazy. The people that are calling for the defunding of police, mostly police, come out of the same communities that are the same people that are talking about the communities they want to support. And those are the communities that are going to be the damaged the most by the reduction in the police department. And your Black community, your Hispanic community, if you go into the community, they don't feel that same way. There's a few group of people that are agitators that unfortunately have a big microphone, supported by the media, pushing a narrative that's just frankly not true, saying that the police department is out on the hunt for Black people, Black males to shoot them all, when in fact, there's more white people that have been shot by the cops over the years than the Blacks. There's been probably, I think the statistic says 1 year. If you ask somebody that after the George Floyd incident, and if you ask somebody how many Black people have been shot by the cops, you're going to hear numbers, 1,000, 5,000. In reality, I believe the number is 44.
Right.
But it's the narrative that's being sold, and the people that should be correcting that narrative aren't doing the job. And it's really sad.
Well, because they have, again, as we were saying earlier, it's about politics and it's about money. When you talk about it, you can talk about anything out there and people don't want to hear about it. But the moment you throw in race, everyone becomes quiet and they all zoom in. Look at just recently the whole thing with, and I hate to bring it up, but with Meghan Markle and the royal family.
Yeah.
He's coming in telling us that, oh, they're racist and they want to know about the brown baby. Now, there's a possibility that someone said, wow, isn't this great? Now we put some color in the family. Now we've got this. But she took it, and she didn't even hear this. It was told to her by hearsay Oh, what they're asking about the skin color of my baby. Okay, I would have done the same thing. What's the big deal? And then for her to say, oh, and they never helped me when I was there. They provided me no support. Well, I remember when we first learned about her and they said they were going to get married, that she was going to be given special attention so that she would understand the inner workings of the royal family. But the moment you put racism on it, it poo-poos everything, and people start to look and they start to point fingers. And you don't get the correct dialogue. And like you said, Captain, the media helps to perpetrate these lies.
Yeah, the 24-hour media, if they don't have this agenda, if they don't have this narrative that they want to put out, their 24-hour news program is done in about 30 minutes if you're just covering the news. So you've got to go off to these side issues and side stories and deal with things that are just destructive to our society and pitting all of us together. I do not believe we're a racist country. We all have prejudices. My grandmother, my family came over from Spain in 1929. My first language was Spanish. My dad was a professional baseball player, played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Hollywood Stars. My uncle Glenn was Tommy Lasorda's roommate at Montreal and Brooklyn, and then Cleveland. My other uncle Wesley was with the Giants. My grandmother was not a racist, but boy, was she prejudiced. We grew up knowing that she didn't like Mexicans that wore wife beater t-shirts and khaki pants. She said those were zoot zooters, and she didn't like Mexican zoot zooters. So don't dress like them. When we came over, when my brother and I would come to my grandmother's house, we had to dress properly. My dad was the only person that I knew that might have been a racist. And I don't mean that he was a racist, but that group of people in that age that came out of World War II, out of the South, did not have the relationship with the black people that I did. I went to school with pretty much an all predominantly white group of kids. I think we had, I think there was one black kid in our class, 1965. There might have been 15 or 20 of the Mexican kids in our class. But I was in sports. So I played baseball, basketball, and everything I was doing, I was with black people, white people, Mexican people all the time. They were great athletes. They were good friends of mine. I roomed with a Mexican and a black kid in college. They're still friends of mine. I never thought about race ever. In my academy of 19 kids that I came on with in the early 70s, there was 5 white guys, 14 Mexican Americans, and 2 blacks. Today, we're still all friends, very close friends. Nobody thought about race. So for me, when I hear about this issue about race, it's hard for me to understand it. I recognize that there are racists out there, but I don't think there's that many. And overall, I think this country, there's only one country in the world and in the history that fought a war to fix our internal problem, to take care of what we had done wrong. And there's only one country that created civil rights to help what we did wrong. And even though we have had our mistakes, we're a very just country. And there's no country like this anywhere. And
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to add, that I want to pivot on to Joe Biden's speech tonight and the whole COVID relief bill, that they call it a COVID relief bill. Is
I
that,
didn't hear that.
if we have people say that it's a systemically racist country, that there's racism, and I agree that racism does exist. But if it's systemic in the country, as many on the left would like to say that it is, I would say are the systemic racist, because they are the ones who are constantly falling on their swords and apologizing for whatever reason. They're the ones that control big tech, big media, and born out of big tech and big media are the most racist opinions, racist ideas, and segregationism. So it is they who are the racists if it exists at the level that they say it exists, because they have the power to end it. They have the power to make change. But will they? Do they? So I would say, if you want to say it exists to the people on the left, look in the mirror, for thee or thou are the guilty parties.
Yes, and they're obsessed with the subject.
Obsessed
right?
with it.
Obsessed with the subject. I mean, they never tire of it. And just on that level, I mean, that it seems to be the predominant thing, or one of the top things about other human beings that they focus on, even if they believe they're doing it in a good way. I mean, aren't they more interested in people as individuals? Why? I mean, just because someone is of another color, why would, why obsess over that in favor of getting to know that person, and what does he like, and what are his thoughts, and what are his talents, and his history, his stories, his unique attributes as an individual, feeling, thinking, creative person? Why is his skin color the subject of most conversations? I mean, any more than being obsessed with someone's hair color or height or weight. I mean, to me, it's not that you don't see these things, but why should that be the predominant subject all the time? Unless you're obsessed with it for some reason. I mean, why? It's not individualistic or humanistic at all. It's kind of a kind of obsessive thing, which, yes, I agree with you. That's a kind of, you could call that a form of racism, to give that one physical characteristic such inordinate focus in your relationships, I think.
It's funny, notwithstanding that I don't think we're a racist country, but if you were to just entertain the fact that these guys, this group, the left, wants to say we're a racist country, systematically racist, I point to this. They're saying that these things have occurred in Detroit, in LA, in Baltimore, in all blue states that have been run by the Democrats for the last 50 years. If the institutions in all those Democrat-run areas are systemically racist, then why don't they blame themselves? They've been in charge.
Exactly, that's what I would
They've been
say.
in charge for 50
Right.
years.
Yes,
Maybe they had I think you said look in the mirror.
right,
Definitely need to look in the mirror. They've been running the show.
exactly.
Yeah.
And now they want to blame everyone else for the mistakes that they have made and they continue to make.
Oh, yeah.
So that being said, well, let's move on to Joe Biden and the COVID relief bill. He gave a presser today, or tonight, whereby he read from the teleprompter everything he was saying, never once did he give credit to President Trump and Operation Warp Speed. You would think that Joe Biden came up with the whole COVID, the cure for the China virus and everything else. I'm thinking, you want to bring people together, but you cannot give recognition to the person who went out and, with Operation Warp Speed and got all these pharmaceutical companies to do testing on top of testing to come up with the vaccine. You just forgot about that? What do you guys say?
Yeah, I mean, President Trump, he picked out Moderna, and he gave that company a great deal of federal funding. That was a chance he took on a relatively small company, I understand, and they hit big, as we know. Also invested a lot in Pfizer, I understand, a lot of actually good use of our tax dollars, because those companies came through. And as I've said before, Big Pharma gets a lot of negative press in this country, and they're not perfect, but boy, they sure saved the day this time. And, I agree, Rob. I mean, we hear a lot of preening and self congratulatory talk from President Biden, and we haven't heard even the most basic expression of gratitude to President Trump, to Vice President Pence, who I understand was very much in a leadership role on Operation Warp Speed, and the scientific community. They teed it up for the Biden administration beautifully, and there's very little. I haven't heard any expression of thanks for that, which is really lousy, I think.
And I don't think we will, not from the Biden administration. And the media is not calling them out and saying, "Wait a minute, aren't you going to recognize that your predecessor, the person, who?" But nope. Tomorrow they will run around with their hair on fire saying, "Oh, what a great speech he gave. And oh, I was tickling up my legs. And oh my gosh, he was so on point." Whereas the guy was reading up a teleprompter. It looked like he was in pain. He wanted to go and take a nap. And then when he was done, he turns his back, walks away, or he doesn't really walk. He scoots to his next destination. I'm like, oh, really? 25 minutes of what? What exactly did you say? It's just unbelievable.
It was just platitudes.
Platitudes, right?
I mean, look, I hope our new president does well. I certainly hope the vaccination effort, as we all do, goes well. But I think that this was an uninspired speech. It was a lot of cliches. Very little was meaningful. I noticed that he said all Americans will be eligible to get the vaccine by May 1st, whatever that means. That doesn't mean you're actually going to be getting it. Right. Look, as the captain said, government is not the most efficient. We're an enormous country. Clearly, this effort is going to take time. I just hope that with Biden in charge, things are done efficiently as possible. I mean, I guess it's going to take a certain amount of time, no matter what, and it's a real process.
Well, I'm just glad at least he did this press conference. I know the media, even the liberal media, started questioning and asking, when was Biden going to come out of the shadows and do a press conference? So at least he did this. But it does concern me because, and we've been saying this before the election, he's really probably not well enough to be president of the United States, to be commander in chief. So, and the media will not really hold him to any standard. He could have been a little gracious and acknowledge his predecessor, President Trump. Yes. Plus, you have to give President Trump the credit for Operation Warp Speed. President Trump and former Vice President Pence, you're absolutely right, Heather. But this crew, the left, the Democrats, they just don't have it in them. But I agree with you, Heather. I don't like the way the election went down, particularly at the presidential level. But for the sake of this country, I do hope President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris succeed. or do
was
well
gonna-
at least.
Especially with this, yes, with not with the socialist agenda, but with getting everybody the vaccines.
I
Absolutely.
introduced the boss.
Hi
Please do.
guys.
Hi.
This is the one that runs the restaurant.
Oh, hi.
Oh, cool.
This is the boss.
Oh,
Boss. Well, thank you, boss, for allowing
beautiful
the
boss you have.
captain to come on and talk to us tonight.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
So, Captain, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I didn't hear, I only heard a couple bits and pieces. The one that I thought was the most comical part was when he had said that he was talking about how many people had gotten vaccinated since he became president, and as if, and I think he said that prior to that, nobody or hardly anybody had been vaccinated by the previous administration. It was him that had done it all. Well, the vaccine was not out for dissemination until after he became president. For anybody getting the shots, as far as I know.
Right. Well, Joe has no shame. He's going to take credit for things that he knows that he shouldn't take credit for. The media will not call him out. They will allow it to happen because of their hate for Donald Trump. Now, just moving on really quickly, because we have like 15 minutes to go. What are you guys' thoughts on, for one, Gavin Newsom in California being recalled? Do you think it's going to happen, Captain?
Well, I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
He's ruined this. He is completely. We have not had a good governor since Reagan, I suppose. Actually, Duke Majian, I think, did okay, but we've had some very poor governors.
Right.
And Arnold, he didn't have enough experience. He thought he could come here and steamroll everything, and he just he was a complete disaster.
Kicked out Gray Davis, and then you guys got him. I thought it was all about star power for Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, right. And I mean, I love this state. I'm here. You know, I own 40 acres, the restaurant. I've got five generations in the fire service.
Mm-hmm.
The kids are all here. And when I go to my other houses in Arizona, after about 2 weeks, I miss it. I want to come home.
Right.
I love it here, but it just drives me nuts. I feel so bad for my grandkids when they grow up. I don't know that they'll ever be able to afford anything to buy. It's just they've really ruined a great state.
Well, the same thing in New York City. You look at New York City, look at our governor, our crazy governor. A lot of people are focusing on the sexual harassment, assaults, and charges allegedly. But I'm looking at the 15,000 elderly that died at his hands.
It's much worse. You're right, Rob.
And
He gets off easy if he gets off because of the comments to the women. I mean, I think it's a real reflection of the values of our time that what seems like a horrendous decision that could have contributed to mass death is given far less concern and credence than do you want to play strip poker in the workplace? I'm not saying the latter is good if that's what happened, but give me a break. I mean, it's not life and death. I almost wonder, I don't mean to sound like, a conspiracy theorist, but if all that is kind of giving him an easy out or something to not.
It does seem that way. We had two guests who were on Tuesday who kind of felt that he's being tested by all of this and that this is a lesser of two evils. But in my opinion, they're equally wrong. But the fact that the media just completely whitewashed over the nursing home deaths, and they allowed him to bully Janice Dean from Fox News, and they said nothing about it, and they joined in on it when he was bullying her and so many other people. I mean, I think this is just the beginning of the firestorm, since we've been talking about fires, that we'll more than likely we'll probably hear and see from this governor. We've all known him to be a bully, and now it's slowly coming out. I think that he's trying to suppress it. An article came out today that his office has been calling a lot of these women, probably trying to scare them.
Oh my.
And for him he was on TV every day with this. I mean, I thought it was fake. I never bought into his press conferences. And women were like, oh, they want to marry him. Go ahead, Captain.
I think it was a plan, intentional, that the media did not focus on the rest homes for one reason. They could not control that narrative. That narrative, the facts, they didn't want to play with because they couldn't manipulate the facts. So they pushed over to the sexual issues, which they could manipulate. They could cover as they wanted to, minimize those things.
Good point.
What they didn't, when they made that decision, though, I think they were thinking they were dealing with one person and then maybe two. Well, now it's six. And I don't think they ever knew that it was going to get to six. And the funny thing about this, they don't control that narrative, actually. The accusers are controlling that narrative. So I think it's backfired on them.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Very good and interesting analogy.
So, Captain, you think that are you agreeing with the theory that maybe somebody who's more favorable to Cuomo maybe was initially wanting to kind of give him almost like an out or a chance to resign as far as the women stuff, but then you're saying it snowballed and got bigger?
I think when it first came out, they were gonna treat it like Biden did. Biden was accused with more facts and more serious issues than what Biden's been, but they were able to just minimize it.
Interesting.
Paint her as a, they minimized her, turned her into, made Biden the victim, and tried to flip the tables. Well, when they were only dealing with one lady, with Cuomo, they figured they could probably do that. They could probably get to the point where they go back to the Clinton defense and just say, we don't want to talk about sex. Sex is not an issue in politics. Stay out of my bedroom. That's the defense that the Democrats always use.
Oh, yeah.
If it was a Republican, oh my God, they'd be on a warpath to get rid of him. But Absolutely. It's a Democrat. But I don't think when they made that conscious decision to play it that way, they were expecting six women coming forward. Now they're not sure what to do.
Interesting.
Right, because if you remember, they were saying that, okay, 2, that's fine. 3, well, if another, and now and another, and another, and then another, and another, they've all come out. And I hear now that they've turned it over to the judicial arm, and they're talking about impeachment now. But he's not going to step down. He has no reason to step down. He can just sit this out, just like Governor Northam did, and just say, hey, let me just sit it out. What can you guys do? I'm not going to resign. And you have a lot of New Yorkers that are saying, I think it's 55%, that are saying, oh, don't do anything to him, let him stay there. But even if they do, if they're successful in impeaching him, and I hope they are, because I want him to go out in shame, because I don't think he should ever run for public office. I think he should fade away with his head between his legs. But if they are successful in impeaching Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's going to fill his shoes? Another progressive, who's probably worse as far as policy-wise, because the Republicans don't have their stuff together. Now, I heard there's this guy, something Saratini or something, who's looking at it. But the Republicans should have had someone in place, groomed, to come in and say, hey, I can be the candidate. So Cuomo will probably just wait this out and see what happens if they're successful in impeaching him. In the meantime, he'll probably antagonize and bully people that if you vote to impeach, this is what I will do. The guy's a very dangerous, nasty man. Bebe, what do you say?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Rob. I think you've nailed it. The Republicans don't have their act together, so Cuomo is just going to hang in there until he's forced out. That's essentially what's going to happen. But I think the good news, if I could add a silver lining, is that the Democrats have been put on notice both in California and in New York, because the recall Gavin Newsom efforts have gathered a lot of steam. I think, correct me, Captain, if I'm wrong, I think there are upwards of 1 million signatures or more. I could be wrong.
I believe they got 2 million as of today, or to possibly forecasted for tomorrow.
Awesome. So there's a very good chance that he will be recalled. And on the East Coast, Cuomo the tyrant, because they both acted like tyrants.
Cuomo the tyrant. I like that.
He is now under intense scrutiny. Even of de Blasio, the communist mayor of New York City, is calling for Cuomo to resign. So
they've never
in hot water.
Right. And de Blasio thinks that he could step in and become governor. I mean, the audacity. He's ruined New York City, but he thinks that we're going to vote for him to be governor. And, you know, hey, this is New York City. Anything could happen. But you would think, he would just fade away. But no, he's still, I mean, he ran for the president. Now, I can be the governor. Are you serious, man? Yeah, Heather, if he decides to do it, you and I, we should run for governor.
We should, because he's incompetent. Although I never had the impression that he's as evil a guy. I think de Blasio, personally, my personal opinion is I think he's kind of a bumbling idealist. I don't think
he's evil, but definitely a bumbling idealist.
Almost Machiavellian and you know, very immoral, is my opinion. But I think de Blasio is a well-intentioned liberal. Is my impression of him. I think that yes, he's presided over a lot of mess. I think he has these foolish ideas, and you know but I kind of just personally don't think he's as bad a guy. I just think that he would probably bumble everything as he has done in New York City.
Well, from far away out here on the West Coast, de Blasio to me is like a bubblehead.
Yeah.
You get at the ballpark, you know, and Como is evil.
Yeah.
He's a bully, and he's evil.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I would agree with that assessment. Yeah. Absolutely.
Terrible.
How would you assess Governor Newsom? What do you think of Newsom? Bubblehead or evil, or both?
Both. Well, you know, I don't think Newsom is evil. He's cunning.
Mm-hmm.
He's a bozo. For a guy and he's actually very smart. But
interesting.
It's just his ideas. I don't know if they're politically motivated, or if I think he truly believes what he thinks, because you know, he came out of San Francisco, but he comes from a very powerful family. I don't think he would have ever made it anywhere in politics in this state had he not been connected with Nancy and that Democratic socialite group up there in San Francisco.
Right.
He can't speak. He is just terrible to listen to. He doesn't, I don't know, the guy's just really something else. When I see him do these news conferences at emergencies and stuff, I just shake my head. I go, how does this guy do that? You know, and I don't have any illusions of grandeur that I would want his job, or Trump's job, or even a House representative or a senator. I've been asked to run for about the last 30, 40 years. Somebody has tried to get me to run for an office, local or national. And I tell them, guys, you don't realize how much work that is.
Oh, Captain, I'm sure you do a lot more than the representatives and senators. I mean, you manage things. What do they do on stuff?
But I don't want to go down an airplane and fly. I want to come home at night, sit here on the couch with my 3 labs, talk to my wife, go to the river, sit and drink a margarita at the pool, and kind of have a simple life.
Well, they do plenty of that. They do plenty of drinking at the bar. And I'm talking about the representatives and senators who, God bless them. I mean, there are a few smart ones and, Rand Paul among them. But for the most part, I think a lot of them just do a lot of backslapping and voting. And I think that's one of the reasons governors tend to make better presidents is they actually have to run things as you do. So
yeah. And that's there is one prerequisite I'd like to see all politicians have, and that is that they at least had a job before they went into government. That's the problem with Biden. He has never had a job.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that is so true. That is so true. His entire career has been in the government.
I spent 30 years in government, and I spent equally amount of time in the private sector, and I see life from both sides. I see the good and the bad from the private sector. I see the good and the bad from the public sector, and that balance of experience helps me with how I run things privately, and the feelings I have on the public side. And one story that I had when I was a fireman, we used to go out and do company inspections in the afternoon. And you'd go to the small little business and you'd check for fire extinguishers, extension cords, and things like that. And I had to tell my guys, I said, okay, here's the rules. We're not going to nitpick this guy. He's making a living. Everything he has in life is this business. We want to educate him. If it's a very serious situation, let's explain to him why it needs to be corrected, that it's to his benefit to help him stay in business. Let's be cooperative in trying to help him solve the problem. But only the most egregious are we going to file and write up a penalty or a violation. The small stuff, let's note it, let's talk to them, let's educate them, and let's go on to the next one. Because don't forget, these people pay our salary. And most of the kids that worked in the fire service that worked for me came right out of high school. They'd never had a job. They just became firemen. So they had no perspective of what it's like to be in the private sector and have to pay people and write a paycheck to somebody.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much to Captain Cox for joining us tonight. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but we appreciate the knowledge you gave us tonight. And thank you so much for your years of service. Much respect for that. Please join us again Sunday night. We will have congressional candidate Rayla Campbell on the show, and Bebe and Heather might be joining us as well. So look forward to that. And thank you, Captain Cox. We hope to have you on again, maybe to talk about these restaurants and lockdowns and how they're affecting the business out there in California.
Whenever you guys are ready, just let me know, and I'd be glad to participate.
Great. And I would like to say also, if you would like to support us, here's our GoFundMe page. We also have Cash App so that we are able to stay on the different platforms that are costly. We know that Twitter and a lot of the liberal social media platforms are counseling a lot of us, a lot of conservative voices. They don't want to hear what we have to say, but hey, we're going to keep going anyway. So if you would like to support us, feel free to go to our GoFundMe page. want to say thank you to Heather and to Bebe for joining us tonight. And
Thank
make
you.
certain that you tune in Saturday for Barbara from Harlem at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on Facebook.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Rob.
guys.
Thank you.
Good night,
God
everyone.
bless. Be
Guys,
safe.
great to meet
Thank
you,
you.
Captain.
Thank you,
Thank you
guys.
for your service. Take care.
You're
Bye-bye now.
welcome. It was my pleasure.